Yeah, so my name's Charles Eisenstein. Some people might call me a philosopher. Maybe a few would call me an economist, but not many. I'm not a professional in any of these fields. Really, what I see myself as is a storyteller. I see myself as telling the story and helping to create the new myths that will define the civilization of the future. So my first big book, The Ascent of Humanity, is a little bit ironic. The title's a little bit ironic because on the one hand, we've risen to a place that no other species has occupied. I mean, we're unique on this planet. We've developed technology that's built on itself for thousands of years. But in another sense, we've descended as far as our quality of life, what it's like to be human, the feeling of connection, authenticity, joy. We look back on civilization and it's been one horror after another. I mean, yeah, there's been beauty too, but a lot of terrible things have happened and are continuing to happen. And so we think, have we really ascended? Or is there something really wrong, something terribly wrong?
And what is wrong?
What is wrong? That's the question I asked myself for years and years. I mean, even going back to high school and university, just feeling like the world is supposed to be more beautiful than this. Life is supposed to be more joyful than this, than this thing I've been offered as normal. Here, Charles, here's normal. And if you don't like it, there's a problem with you. And something in me always rebelled against that. I thought that this isn't normal, it can't be normal. Something's wrong around here. And that feeling of wrongness made it impossible for me to fully participate in the world that was offered to me. So I kind of was half in, half out. Sometimes I would get a real job, sort of, but then I wouldn't really do it all the way. And it was just really important to me to figure out what was the source of the wrongness. Was it my imagination? Maybe the world's just fine, like everybody is acting. Everybody behaves as if things were just fine. Otherwise, why would people be caring about football and celebrities? If the house is on fire, you're not going to care about football and celebrities. You're going to put out the fire. So the fact that everybody is talking about football and celebrities tells you unconsciously that, things are fine. It's your imagination. So I became very interested to understand what's wrong around here. And that is that's what led me to write The Ascent of Humanity, where I identified the source of wrongness as separation, which you could say is a story, because ultimately on some level, separation is an illusion. We're all together. We're all in this together. And we're not separate from each other. We're not separate from nature. As we are discovering today, very painfully, we're not separate from nature. I described the story of separation, which is a myth. And then how this myth is generating all the crises we see today, making the world fall apart. And then what could this collapse of our old stories be birthing? What is coming next? The source of oneness, where does that come from? It's just the nature of reality, and our stories and our illusions can obscure that temporarily. And only at an increasing cost. It gets more and more painful to live in separation. For our species to live in separation from nature is becoming more and more painful as well. And we're causing more and more damage by staying in that illusion. And at some point, we won't be able to stay there anymore. And we will, like it or not, enter into a state of reunion, which isn't all of a sudden, all at once necessarily. I'm not saying that we're going to forget our distinct identities, but it's that today we've become trapped in a very tiny identity, this ego identity, which should be part of a much broader identity that includes our relationships to each other, to community, to place, to the land, to nature, to the planet, to the cosmos. All of these different levels of self need to be included. So that's the transition we're going through, and it's just really a return to what's real. Certainly the teaching of oneness has always been with us, because it's always been there. And you could say that all of these ancient teachings are kind of like a recessive gene that's just waiting for the time to really blossom forth. And up until recently, I don't think we've really been ready yet, because we've been exploring this world of separation. And you could say that you have to complete the journey of separation before you're really ready to return to union. Because, and this gets really kind of theological almost. You can ask, well, why did we even go on this journey? The religious scholars, Hindus especially, ask this. Why did God split God's self into billions of pieces that forgot who they were? And the answer is to experience all of this and then to come back at a higher level of understanding and experience enriched by all that you've gone through. And so humanity is coming back into realization of connectedness, which we certainly had as hunter-gatherers. So now the challenge is to bring that into a mass society. One metaphor that I use to understand the human experience, the historical human experience, so that I don't think, because sometimes it seems like it was just all a big mistake. Jared Diamond, in an early article, wrote, agriculture is the biggest mistake human beings ever made. Because everything awful, slavery, famine, war, it really kind of all started with agriculture, plagues, And so I wanted to understand, what is the purpose of this journey? What's really going on here? So one metaphor that I use is that of childhood and the transition to adulthood, where humanity went through a phase of growth. And in that growth phase, we were like, a child. And our species is very young, actually. And so in the childhood of humanity, we grew and just took from nature and didn't really think much about what we give back to nature. And I'm not talking about hunter-gatherers here. I'm talking about civilization, okay? So we didn't think about what to give back to nature. We were just like a child. My children, they don't really consider too much how to give back to me. Their job is to receive, and I'm happy with that. I don't want them to pay me back. And so that was our attitude toward nature too. Now we are reaching the end of growth. Most environmentalists are beginning to understand that we can't keep growing much more. And as we reach the end of growth, we're going through the same transition that a person does. So one thing that happens as you reach the end of your physical growth, you begin to develop in other ways. So one of those ways is that you develop a new kind of love relationship that's no longer just about receiving. But you fall in love, you have your sweetheart, and you want to give her or him a gift. You want to give and receive. If you don't, then you're just kind of a grown-up baby, a big baby. We recognize people like that as being immature. But normally, you want to give and receive. And you want to maybe even create something together, maybe a family. So we're beginning to enter that relationship to Earth as well, starting maybe in the 1960s, again in mass culture, with the environmental movement, where we began to not just want to take from Earth and exploit Earth. Before then, exploiting natural resources, that was a good thing. Exploiting was good. There was no negative connotation about exploiting Earth. But in the 60s, we began to want to give back to Earth, to protect Earth, to heal Earth, to undo the damage that has been done. And maybe even someday to co-create with Earth. But I think in the first phase of humanity's new relationship to Earth, and it's really also a new story, a new myth about why we're here. Whereas in the past it was be fruitful and multiply and dominate and take over everything. And today we're stepping into a new story, which is maybe an ecological story, that we're part of the circle of life. We're here to contribute to the well-being of all. This is our new story. And so that's one thing that happens in the transition to adulthood that our species is going through, falling in love. The other thing that happens is an ordeal, coming of age ordeal. So primitive societies understood the necessity of a coming of age ordeal, and they would create them on purpose. They'd send you out into the jungle or into isolation, or they'd subject you to extreme physical pain or psychedelic plants or something that would you have to go have a vision, and you'd have to go through something that would really make your world fall apart. And everything that used to make sense doesn't make sense anymore. And I don't even know who I am anymore. And so your identity would fall apart, and you'd be able to take on a larger identity that an adult identity that would enable you to become a full member of the tribe. So I think that all of these crises we're facing today in every realm, we're facing all these crises. I think that these are very much like a coming of age ordeal that makes us forget even who we are. Nothing makes sense anymore. The world is falling apart. Many people are experiencing this. And it is propelling us into a new relationship to Earth, where we become a full member of the tribe of all life on Earth, giving as well as receiving. The indigenous people on Earth, they, in a way, are role models, which doesn't mean that we undo all of civilization and reduce the population by 99%. We don't become hunter-gatherers again, but we take important things from those cultures, important ways of understanding who we are, and translate them into a modern context. So it could be a sense of the sacredness of all life. It could be gift economies. That's an important one for me. How do we share things? How do we live peacefully among each other? How do we resolve disputes? How do we work with the things we can't measure, we can't quantify? Indigenous people have a lot to teach us about these things. So, a lot of my work has been recently in economics. And so the question isn't, to me, it's not how do we stop using money, but because I think we need money or something like it in a mass society with a high degree of division of labor. But it's how do we imbue money with some of the properties that gifts had in a gift economy. Sacred economics, it's really about how to align money with the new stories that we are coming into today. Or you could say, how to align money with what is becoming sacred to us. You could say that money always was aligned with what was sacred to us. For the last few hundred years, growth was sacred to us. Conquering nature was sacred to us. And money fit in perfectly with that. Money forces us to grow. The money system we have today doesn't work if there's not growth. And that's inappropriate now. And new things are becoming sacred to us, like restoring the planet and creating social justice and reclaiming life from anonymity. So we need a new kind of money system that is the ally and not the enemy of these goals. We need a money system that is ecological, so that we can rejoin the circle, the tribe of all life on Earth. Today's money system is anti-ecological because it demands endless growth and it converts all of nature into money. and converts community into services, into money. So yeah, that's the book envisions what a different kind of money system would look like, and also describes how the transition can happen and what it means on a personal level too. Yeah, when an artist makes art for the money, it's not quite as good. You can always tell, commercialized art. That's why we call an artist like that a sellout. And it's not a nice thing to say to somebody, a sellout. I think that, well, one idea that I work with a lot is how to do business in the spirit of a gift. So, and I consider myself kind of an artist. So the way that I like to do it is that I put my creations out there and I say, I'm giving this to you. Why? Because it was given to me. I think when you're honest with yourself as an artist, you realize that the source of your art is not yourself. It's coming through you. It's a gift. And a gift wants to be passed on. So I say, yeah, I'm giving this to you. And if you feel gratitude, if you feel the desire to make a return gift, then I welcome that. So that would mean that you decide the price and not me. And maybe the price is zero. Or maybe you don't feel gratitude toward me, you feel gratitude toward society. You feel gratitude toward the earth. Who knows where your gratitude goes? But maybe it comes to me, and so maybe you would give me a return gift. So I do a lot of my talks, seminars, retreats like that, where the participants, they choose. My book as well, it's online for free. I don't say for free though, I say as a gift. So if you read it online, then you can choose to make a payment if you want to. And I think art can work like that as well. Ultimately, because how can you put a price on art? Really, any price is too much, and any price is not enough. Yeah, it seems very difficult to change, although a lot of people are changing already. I meet many artists who work like this, musicians too. You almost can't help it, especially for musicians, like people don't have to pay for your music. All of the copyright protections and all that stuff's not really working anymore. I mean, the music industry tried to keep it artificially scarce so that you have to buy it. But today, digital content, it's basically has zero production cost after the first copy. The marginal cost of production is zero, which means that the natural price point tends towards zero as well. And so even if you try to I'm gonna keep it, I'm only gonna give it to you if you pay me, you can't do it. You can't make it work. So the new business model is that you get rich by giving it away for free. And then, for a musician, maybe lots of people are listening to it and they want to come to his concerts, and then maybe they have to pay to come to the concert. Or maybe he could do it like me and say, here's my concert, here's my gift, and you decide how much to pay. So I think it's starting to happen already. But yeah, most people don't change when the old way is still working. So if it's still working, you're not going to change. But it's not working very well. And on a global level, all of our systems aren't working very well anymore. It's just a matter of how much pain do we want to endure before we finally make the change? Because we will. I mean, even if it is in death, we will change, because the system today is not sustainable. Science has its proper domain. And science as we know it, and the scientific way of thinking, the rational, empirical, evidence-based way of thinking, that is very useful in a certain domain. The problem isn't really with science per se. I think the problem is that we've extended that way of thinking and that way of being and that way of choosing and that way of understanding beyond its proper domain. So we try to be rational and scientific about things that we shouldn't be, things that should be heart-based. or emotionally based or feeling based. So there's something really beautiful about science. Yeah, because we're extremely comfortable in that scientific attitude, and it's not always appropriate. So we need to begin to become familiar and comfortable with other ways of knowing, which doesn't discard science. That said, science is, I'm speaking in terms of science as an approach to knowledge, but science is also an institution. And the institution of science falls far short of the ideals of science. The institution of science needs to change drastically. There are so many things that science ignores that are really important for our survival. And many scientific paradigms are also in a state of crisis.
For example?
The medical paradigm. That health comes through the control of bacteria, viruses, hormone levels, body processes, genes, and that better health will come through even more control. The promise of technological medicine was very compelling maybe 40, 50 years ago, when all of these feared diseases were conquered one after the other. But today, almost no major disease has been conquered for 30 years, and a whole bunch of new diseases have appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and we're losing faith in those methods, especially in the United States. You know, the healthcare system is really breaking down, and I think other countries are experiencing a little bit of that as well. I think that in education, it's not just a problem of the content of what's taught, but also the way in which it's taught, which feels like very old paradigm to me. You know, a bunch of people sitting and listening to a lecture, learning the subjects that are dictated by authorities, having to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. You know, I mean, you're learning to be obedient, docile. It standardizes people because everybody's getting a standardized curriculum. And it conditions us to do things we don't really care about for the sake of an external reward. It prepares us for an adulthood of the same, doing things you don't care about for an external reward. Today, for this planet to make it, for this species to make it, we have to do things we really, really care about for their own reward, because we want to. The things that we do for the external reward of money are killing the planet. So the educational system, I think, needs to change as well. Yeah, so underneath all of these changes and all of these transitions, we have the sense that something fundamental is changing. People say that we're, you know, in a spiritual crisis, that it feels like everything is changing. And I do think that it does go, you know, all the way down to the bottom. Like, what's changing is who we are, how we be, how we exist, how we relate on a fundamental level. So you could say that the story of self is changing. The old story of self being that what you are is this separate being among other separate beings in an external universe. It's all separation. You're kind of this bubble of psychology, bumping around against other bubbles of psychology. And here's me, and that's you, and we're separate. And there's out there. And pretty much every field of thought agrees with this. Biology says, yes, that separate being is the expression of your DNA that programs you to maximize reproductive self-interest. Economics says, yes, that separate being is the economic man, again, seeking to maximize rational self-interest. Religion says, yes, It's a separate soul encased in flesh, separate from the flesh, separate from each other, separate from God, but maybe one day to reunite with God or something like that. Today, that story of self is falling apart. It doesn't really make sense anymore in biology when we're beginning to understand that the genes are shared across species all the time, and that we are deeply interdependent on all other beings. We're all in it together, that the loss of one species weakens everybody else, not really separate. In physics, it's even breaking down, where quantum mechanics it understands that subject and object, observer and observed, really aren't separate, not the way we thought. Psychology is breaking down as we understand the social construction of self. In religion, we're beginning to talk about inner beingness, and oneness. So we're undergoing a transition to a new, broader self that includes the others, and we're developing ways to work with that and to think about it. So if somebody makes you angry, instead of othering them and saying, well, that's just because they're awful, you might think, what part of myself are they mirroring? Or what in me created this situation? How can I use this to better understand myself? Or what is it like to be that person? What would it take for me to act as that person does? So all of these ways of thinking about it come from a deep conviction that we're not separate. Certainly in spiritual practice, you might do meditation or something, and you transcend story altogether. And it could be through meditation, it could just be an experience that's sent to you. There's many ways it can happen, but you have an experience of not being in story and of being in immediate contact with reality. I don't think that we're necessarily meant to stay in that state. I think that it's our nature as human beings to be storytelling animals. I think that that's actually why language was invented. Not to help us survive, but actually to help us tell stories. Story is a creative tool. If you want to create anything beyond the power of your own hands, you have to enroll other people. You have to tell a story of what is to be. And that story contains roles for other people in it, and a role for yourself too. So we use stories to coordinate human activity. And the stories are mediated by symbols, including money. So money is part of a story. So I don't think that where we're going right now is to stop using story, but it's really to change the story into something that creates what we really want on Earth.